May 28, 1940. The Reich Air Ministry. Berlin. A reconnaissance report lands on a desk, paper, numbers, clipped language, and contempt that isn't even disguised. The document lays out President Franklin Roosevelt's request to Congress, an unprecedented expansion of American aircraft production, capacity for 50,000 airplanes a year. Hermann Göring flips through the pages like he's reading a bad joke. Then he turns to his staff and says it out loud: America must be desperate if it thinks this kind of propaganda will frighten us. They know nothing about war production. Let them try. Let them try converting their automobile plants. Then they'll learn, building a combat aircraft takes more than an assembly line. Göring fails to grasp one thing: in Detroit, someone is already proving him wrong. A Danish immigrant named William Knudsen. Former president of General Motors, now working for a symbolic $1 a year salary as Roosevelt's production chief. And he is about to become the architect of one of the most ambitious industrial transformations in human history. Within 4 years, American factories won't merely hit the impossible number of 50,000. They will reach nearly 100,000 aircraft per year, while simultaneously supplying 2 theaters of war across 2 different oceans. And it all begins with a speech that Berlin laughed at. May 16, 1940. German panzer columns are ripping through France. Roosevelt stands before Congress and says the line that makes skeptics raise their eyebrows: he wants to see this country capable of producing no fewer than 50,000 aircraft annually. The reaction isn't only disbelief from enemies, even allies are skeptical. And they have reasons. In 1939, the United States produced only 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Forces have roughly 1,700 combat planes, many already obsolete. Yet Roosevelt is demanding a 14-fold increase. When the president is asked who could possibly deliver something like that, advisor Bernard Baruch answers without hesitation. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. Knudsen walks away from a $300,000 salary to serve his adopted country. He takes the principles of automotive mass production and forces them into aviation, an industry still used to craftsmanship, slow output, and small runs. The conversion begins immediately. By December 1941, American plants are turning out 2,000 military aircraft per month, nearly a 20-fold jump from just 2 years earlier. Ford announces plans for a massive bomber factory at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing and Douglas expand in Seattle. Thousands of workers pour into the aircraft industry. The arsenal of democracy is waking up. But inside the Nazi leadership, they don't see it, or they refuse to. Their dismissal of American capability is fueled by racial prejudice and deliberate blindness. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the Wehrmacht's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sends Berlin precise, regular reports on U.S. industrial mobilization. In December 1940 he warns, American war production will reach unimaginable heights. Berlin writes back, exaggeration. When Boeticher meets Hitler in February 1939 to discuss American potential, the Führer ignores the numbers and rants about racial degeneration. He describes Americans as half-Judaized, half-Negroized, supposedly incapable of a long war. That ideological blindness will be fatal. Prejudice runs through every layer of the system. Luftwaffe intelligence sees women entering aircraft plants and calls it a sign of desperation. They cannot imagine that a democracy's mobilization could outrun a dictatorship's command. Reports arrive describing factories running 3 shifts. German analysts label it overstated. The Nazi worldview simply cannot adapt to American reality. And that reality is concrete and steel. Willow Run becomes the symbol of American ambition. Built on farmland, and by April 18, 1941, it becomes the largest factory under a single roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a full mile. Ford's production chief Charles Sorensen makes a promise that sounds insane: one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, while other plants are turning out one a day. At first, it's a disaster. The first bomber is completed in September 1942, and it essentially has to be rebuilt. Quality collapses, control system failure rates hit 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run is producing only 56 bombers a month, nowhere near the promised hundreds. Critics sneer, will it even run? But Ford's engineers don't quit. They break complexity into controllable sub-assemblies. They develop hydraulic riveting tools. They introduce prefabricated wiring harnesses. They redesign the flow so assembly becomes continuous, moving, relentless. And they keep producing while they keep changing the airplane. In 1943, they pushed through 578 design changes without shutting the line down. By September 1943, output reaches 148 aircraft per month. By December, 365. Then the breakthrough arrives in April 1944. Willow Run delivers 428 B-24s in a single month, roughly one every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. One factory becomes a weight that crushes entire systems. People say it plainly: this single giant is outproducing huge portions of Germany's aviation industry. The first to understand the scale aren't politicians. They're pilots. Even in Tunisia, German airmen notice the shift. The Americans are no longer amateurs. Commander Johannes Steinhoff of JG-77 writes in December 1942, "The most alarming thing isn't that they're good. It's that there are more of them every day." By 1943, more becomes a flood. January 27, 1943 marks the first American raid on Germany itself. 64 bombers strike Wilhelmshaven. In the fall, on Black Thursday over Schweinfurt, American forces lose dozens of B-17s, and replace them in weeks. War becomes arithmetic. In late February 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces fly roughly 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe loses hundreds of fighters, but more importantly, about 100 veteran pilots who cannot be replaced. Adolf Galland reports to Göring, Germany is losing 1,200 fighters a month while producing 1,000. America is producing 2,500 a month while losing around 400. Ace Heinz Barr remembers a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. They had 8 fighters against hundreds. Hopeless. By 1944, American production reaches a scale that shatters the limits of imagination. In that single year, U.S. factories build 96,270 aircraft, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. Germany's total wartime aircraft output is roughly 94,677. That's no longer an argument about numbers. It's a cliff. And the cliff isn't just quantity. It's capability. American bombers carry batteries of 50 caliber guns and thousands of rounds. German fighters increasingly take off with partial ammunition loads. American aircraft feature powered turrets, improved bomb sights, complex navigation systems. German fighters often lack even reliable radios. In Seattle, Boeing Plant 2 is turning out up to 16 B-17s a day by May 1944. Douglas explodes from a small company into 167,000 workers across 9 plants. North American aviation pushes about 500 P-51 Mustangs per month. Lockheed hits 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, even while implementing thousands of combat-driven modifications. And the supporting industries match the pace. General Motors produces 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard builds 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa increases aluminum output by 600%. Dow Chemical drives magnesium production from 6 million a year to 333 million. This is where Nazi prejudice breaks, on the factory floor. Women are less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941. By 1943 they're 65%, around 310,000 women in aviation production. At Douglas Long Beach, women make up nearly half the workforce. Rose Will Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, drives about 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. As the number of female inspectors rises at Douglas, defect rates fall, from 3.2% to 0.3%. Ford adapts tools for smaller hands, and unintentionally boosts efficiency. Lighter pneumatic tools reduce fatigue. Workstations become more ergonomic. Injury rates drop. German intelligence sees women at the benches and calls it desperation. Captured Luftwaffe reports predict quality collapse. Instead, precision rises. As America accelerates, Germany retreats deeper into fantasy and underground. In February 1944, Göring authorizes a dispersed production program, 729 underground sites, worked by slave labor. A typical complex holds tens of thousands of prisoners under horrific conditions. Tens of thousands die. Sabotage becomes routine. Logistics breaks, transportation between scattered facilities causes delays, quality control collapses, and defects multiply. Meanwhile, American innovation speeds up. Boeing develops modular construction for the B-29 across 4 sites with fully interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29 is packed with technologies Germany cannot reproduce even in prototype form. By early 1945, the U.S. is producing around 100 B-29s per month. Then comes the climax, June 6, 1944. The invasion draws on roughly 11,590 Allied aircraft against about 319 German, sortie ratios around 36-1. This isn't a tactical advantage anymore. It's industrial destruction. From January to May 1944, Allied forces drop about 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, more than Germany drops on Britain during the entire war. Transport aircraft lift and supply 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany ever possessed in its transport fleet. By December 1944, individual raids can include 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang has the range to escort deep into Europe. And the crucial fact is simple: there are enough of them. Losses become a rounding error. German pilots call them Indians, they swarm everywhere, all at once. Even the Nazi leadership eventually admits it's a catastrophe. In December 1944, Goebbels writes in his diary that Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority now look like criminal delusion. They are fighting the world's greatest industrial power. Before Normandy, senior leaders say it openly: the Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one Germany destroys and still overwhelm them. When they land, they will bring material superiority no position can withstand. Even Hitler, in January 1945, concedes they should have listened to Boeticher. While Germany built hundreds, America built tens of thousands. Later, Albert Speer testifies that American bombing, executed systematically against industry, undermined German armament output. He describes increases in production, and still acknowledges that the system of attacks shattered the foundation. Germany tries to bet on miracle weapons. The Me-262 jet is a genuine innovation in mid-1944, faster than any Allied fighter. Hitler and Göring believe it can restore air superiority despite being outnumbered. But there are no miracles in a production war. Germany builds about 1,430 Me-262s, with no more than 200 operational at any one time. Engines need major overhaul after minimal hours. Critical materials are missing, forcing lower-quality substitutes. America, meanwhile, begins jet development in 1942. The Bell P-59 disappoints, but the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star outclasses Germany's jets and reaches production before the war ends. American industrial depth allows multiple technology tracks at once, luxury Germany cannot afford. That's why Germany's technological edge in jets changes almost nothing. In total war, what matters is the capacity to build thousands of conventional fighters, while simultaneously preparing the next generation. On May 8, 1945, Göring is arrested by units of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division. At first he's defiant in interrogation. German technology was superior, he insists. Defeat came only from enemy numbers. He is transferred to Ashcan in Luxembourg, a special holding facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, where questioning is relentless and methodical. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducts extensive interviews documenting Göring's changing view of American industrial power. "I knew American capacity was great," Göring admits, "but the performance exceeded my worst fears. That one plant at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak." What shocks him most is American logistics, supplying armies across two oceans without collapsing domestic production. Germany, he says, couldn't reliably supply forces beyond 500 miles from its borders. America supplied armies 5,000 miles from home. At Nuremberg, prosecutors present the case in numbers. Charts show U.S. monthly aircraft output by 1944 exceeding Germany's annual pace. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines play as prosecutors list the German cities hit by bombers built by that single factory. On March 14, 1946, Göring testifies that he always believed America's economic and technical potential, especially in aviation, was extraordinary. But he never imagined aircraft production could be multiplied nearly 100-fold in 4 years. It seemed physically impossible. Prison psychologist G. M. Gilbert records Göring's obsession with statistics. He repeatedly calculates ratios, comparing individual American plants to the entire German system. He fixates on Willow Run, calling it the damned factory that broke us. When shown the totals, America producing 812,615 aircraft engines versus Germany's 241,675, Göring simply stares in silence. The math makes defeat inevitable. Even today, the scale of the transformation is staggering. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, America reaches 295,959 by the war's end, 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft. This isn't just quantity. It's system-level superiority across every part of production. At peak, around 2 million Americans work in aviation manufacturing. And this is democratic mobilization: women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, older citizens, people who in 1941 may have known nothing about aircraft, and by 1945 form the most skilled workforce in the industry. They don't just build airplanes. They redefine production itself. Statistical quality control becomes standard. Automation principles proven at Willow Run spread worldwide. Engineers who build bomber assembly lines later help design rockets like Saturn V, women who rivet B-24s raise children who will walk on the moon. And the miracle doesn't end with victory. It launches an American century. The financial scale breaks conventional logic. Aircraft production consumes about $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone costs more than the Manhattan Project. Yet war doesn't bankrupt America. Industrial expansion produces unprecedented prosperity. Depression-era unemployment vanishes. Personal income doubles between 1940 and 1945. Workers buy war bonds themselves, Willow Run employees alone purchase about $45 million in bonds, helping finance the very operation they're running. Germany, by contrast, pours around 40% of its industrial capacity into aircraft by 1944, and still produces less than half of America's output. Slave labor proves not a multiplier, but a disaster: sabotage, collapsing quality, falling real productivity after 1943, while American productivity rises by roughly 300%. The wartime industrial base becomes the foundation of peace: aluminum smelters built for bombers feed post-war suburbs, chemical plants that made aviation fuel produce plastics for consumer goods, machine tool factories arm the U.S. economy for global dominance. And then there's the organizational advantage. The War Production Board coordinates roughly 184,000 companies. IBM punch card systems track millions of parts across thousands of suppliers. At MIT's Radiation Laboratory, about 4,000 scientists develop navigation systems that give American bombers all-weather capability. When combat reveals a vulnerability in the B-17, Boeing adds a chin turret within 60 days. When Pacific operations demand range, Consolidated modifies B-24s without stopping production. Germany takes months or years. America takes weeks. Adaptability becomes as decisive as volume. Combat feedback flows straight into the factories, pilot observations reach engineers immediately, fixes hit assembly lines in days. Suggestions from line workers go directly to designers. That democratic flow of information outpaces Germany's rigid hierarchy. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Göring writes his final letter, his fullest admission of what the war really was. America won through industrial power, not better soldiers. Germany wasn't beaten by stronger men, but by better factories. His last recorded remark is even more blunt. They declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When the giant woke up, the outcome was inevitable. America didn't merely outproduce them, it revolutionized production itself. That night, Göring takes his own life. But his final words endure as one of history's clearest verdicts on the war of production. Historians argue that American industrial achievement was decisive for Allied victory. Without that material superiority, D-Day would have been impossible. The bombing campaign could not have sustained its tempo. The Pacific War would have been unmanageable. As historian Richard Overy concludes about the air war, the outcome was determined not by morale or tactics, but by the shortage of material. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production. By 1944, America alone was producing more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined, Axis and Allied. This wasn't gradual superiority. It was superiority by an order of magnitude. And that makes Göring's mistake more than arrogance. It is one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in modern history. His contempt for democratic industrial potential cost Germany the war, and millions of lives. In 1940, America looked unready. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial colossus. The arsenal of democracy proved that the assembly line could be as decisive as the front line. The factory worker could be as critical as the soldier. Industrial mobilization could make victory as inevitable as strategy. Göring learned that lesson too late, at the price of his country's destruction. From his sneering reaction to Roosevelt's May 1940 demand to the Reich's collapse runs a single arc: ideology mistook myth for capability, tyranny mistook itself for strength, and racial theory tried to beat industrial mathematics. But mathematics won. America built 295,959 military aircraft. Germany built roughly 94,677. Yet the true victory wasn't just in numbers, it was in method. Free workers outproduced slaves, cooperation beat coercion, open feedback beat rigid command. B-24s rolled off Willow Run's line every 63 minutes. And they weren't just airplanes. They were democracy's answer to tyranny. Every rivet driven by a woman who had been a homemaker months earlier. Every engine assembled by a teenager who left school to serve a nation. Every wing lifted by workers escaping poverty and discrimination. Freedom, united behind a shared purpose, really could bury tyranny under an avalanche of production. Goring laughed at the idea of 50,000 airplanes a year. America answered with nearly twice that, turning his laughter into the sound of a catastrophic misread, the fatal error of a man who understood neither democracy nor production. In the end, both did what bullets couldn't. They buried him, and everything he stood for, under aluminum, steel, and numbers no one could argue with.